Alien girl escapes human pursuit, but is caught with one move. Mel stepped into the bustling marketplace of Sirus space station, where creatures from countless planets jostled, hurried, and traded. The artificial lights shone brightly, illuminating the metallic domes overhead, reflecting off her orange-red skin. Her long silver hair, flowing like a moonbeam, cascaded lightly over her shoulders, making her stand out among the chaotic crowd. However, this wasn't what made Mel anxious. She knew one thing for sure. The data chip in her hand was not something just anyone could possess. The information contained within it could change the fate of the entire universe, and as such, it was a target many powerful factions craved. Around Mel, the shouting of alien vendors hawking their goods, the clanging of machines from spaceship repair shops, and the laughter of strange creatures blended together to form a chaotic symphony. She moved carefully through the market stalls selling all sorts of bizarre items, dodging ongoing transactions. Each step Mel took was calculated, as she needed to keep everything under control. However, an indescribable feeling began to rise within her, a sense of unease, a presence she could clearly feel even though she couldn't see it. That gaze, cold and sharp, like a knife pressed to her back. Mel weaved through the crowd, maintaining her composure, but her heartbeat began to race. She glanced briefly over her shoulder, but saw no one of note. Yet once again, that strange sensation returned, even stronger than before. She furrowed her brow and continued walking, but one thing was certain. She wasn't the only one in this place today with a clear purpose. And the one following her wasn't just anyone. As Mel continued walking, the silhouette of a man appeared among the crowd, like a shadow emerging from behind. Not everyone would recognize Max immediately, but the way he moved through the crowd was unmistakable. A powerful, cold presence, like a wave sweeping everything in its path. Max, the security chief of Sirus space station, was someone even strangers had to be cautious of. He stood out in his sleek black battle armor, the metallic sheen reflecting under the harsh lights, flawless in every detail. Max's slightly disheveled brown hair still held an air of authority, and his sharp eyes seemed to pierce through everything. That gaze seemed to be able to see through the soul, making anyone facing him feel uneasy, even if he stood still. Mel had encountered Max a few times during major transactions, but had never directly faced him. This time, his presence was clearer than ever. He recognized Mel at first glance. There was no surprise in his eyes, only certainty and resolve. To him, she was the target, and the data chip in her hand was exactly what he needed. A chance too great to miss. Max didn't rush or hurry. He moved slowly, as if wanting to observe every movement Mel made. Each step he took, despite the chaotic crowd, was full of purpose. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a clear path for Max. None dared to obstruct him. He was not only a security chief with exceptional physical strength, but also a brilliant strategist, always knowing how to control the situation to his advantage. Mel could feel the shift in the air, as if each of Max's footsteps was closing in on her. She knew this was no ordinary chase. Mel's intuition wasn't wrong. He wasn't just following her, he was hunting her. To Max, she wasn't just an ordinary agent, she was an important target. And if he captured her, the data chip would fall into his hands. A part of Mel felt the tension, but another part felt a strange thrill. This wasn't her first time being pursued, but it was the first time she faced an opponent so formidable. Max's gaze never left her, not to be cautious, but as though he was calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Mel kept moving, knowing she couldn't let herself be caught. But she also understood that escaping this man wasn't going to be easy. His eyes remained locked on her, like a predator waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. She had only one choice: run faster or face him. The anxiety inside Mel built up, and she knew she couldn't let Max get any closer. Instinctively, her legs began to move faster, cutting through the crowded streets where people were preoccupied with their own business. The bright lights above reflected off her every movement, making her stand out even more. But she didn't care about that. With every faster stride, Mel felt her body working at full capacity, her legs flying through the narrow streets. She skillfully dodged creatures standing by, weaved through stalls selling strange goods, and gripped the data chip in her hand as though it were a treasure that couldn't fall into anyone else's hands. Her breaths came in quicker bursts, but there was a strange clarity in her mind. This was the moment of truth. She had to get away from Max, not let herself be caught. But just moments later, the feeling of being watched returned. She glanced over her shoulder, and although she couldn't see Max, one thing was clear in her mind. He wasn't far. From behind, a powerful presence was closing in step by step. Mel quickly assessed the situation. These narrow streets might help her evade Max's line of sight for a short time, but not forever. She needed to change tactics. She quickly turned down a narrow alleyway where towering buildings formed metal walls around her, seemingly shielding everything within. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the tight space, quick and deliberate. Each time she glanced back, all she saw was the stillness of the darkness. But a strange feeling stirred within her. It was as if Max was still there, never giving up, never stopping. Moments later, she heard footsteps from behind. Slow but steady, the sound grew clearer, stronger. Max was chasing her, and not just chasing, he was accelerating. Mel couldn't believe it, but when she looked over her shoulder again, she saw the truth. Max was closing in, quickly narrowing the gap. She couldn't keep going like this. Just moments ago, Mel had felt like she was about to escape, but now he was almost right behind her, with no obstacle in sight to stop him. He wasn't being left behind like others she had outrun before. Mel had no time left. She had to quickly come up with a new plan, and fast. She sensed a change in the air. The footsteps behind her were no longer the faint sound of someone following, but strong, deliberate steps. Max had nearly caught up with her, just a second away from her as she was about to turn a corner. But in that instant, she felt a powerful force from behind. Max had caught up, and with one precise move, he reached out and swung himself toward her. It felt as if she was being yanked down to the ground. Max had locked her legs, trapping her in a perfect maneuver. Despite all her previous attempts to escape, her body could do nothing but stay trapped, unable to move. Cold sweat broke out, and an indescribable feeling surged within her. Yet, she couldn't deny how strong Max's grip was, surpassing any strength she thought she could use to escape. Max looked up at her, not with a mocking or proud expression, but with a determined and decisive look. His sharp eyes gleamed with a certainty that not everyone could possess. He didn't let her go immediately, but only gazed at her with a slight, knowing smile at the corner of his lips. In a hurry, his voice rang out, both mocking and challenging. The question didn't sound tense, but from it, a chilling silence filled the space between them. Mel, though caught, kept her composure. She couldn't let him see her weakness, even though the truth was she could do nothing at that moment. Before she could react, a loud explosion sounded from a distance, shattering the tense atmosphere for a moment. The ground shook, the air thinned, and the light from the blast dazzled her eyes. A powerful shockwave pushed both Mel and Max away, causing them to fall to the ground. The explosion tore through the air like a ripping sound, making everything blur in a thick cloud of smoke. Blood rushed to Mel's ears, and the surrounding space became chaotic and full of fear. In an instant, everything had changed, and all calculations seemed meaningless. Max quickly got to his feet, his hand reaching out toward Mel to help her get free from the chaotic rubble. Before they could even get a clear look at their surroundings, both were swept into the whirlwind of the ongoing attack. Alarms blared throughout the space station, the sound of emergency sirens screaming across the facility. Max didn't waste time looking around. "Get up," he commanded, his voice firm. "Follow me." Sirus space station now faced not only a chase, but an unprecedented crisis. Everything was in chaos, and before Mel, Max was no longer the one chasing her. He had now become her only ally in a dire situation that they couldn't escape unless they worked together. They hurried down the corridors, the red emergency lights flashing brightly overhead. With each passing second, the station seemed to be on the verge of exploding completely. Mel realized that the station's existence was now under serious threat, and the data chip was no longer her only concern. Everything had changed in an instant, and now they had to figure out how to survive this storm of attacks. Both Mel and Max raced through the halls, their footsteps echoing in the empty space, joined by the sound of alarms. The smoke had yet to clear, and the tension filled every corner of the Sirus space station. Everything was happening too fast, and now there was only one option left: to fight together to survive. Max glanced back at Mel, his expression serious. "This is a coordinated attack," he said, his voice low. "We need to figure out what they're planning before everything is destroyed." Mel took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I know, but they're not attacking randomly. It's a calculated strategy, and I have a feeling they're targeting this space station for something much bigger, something we don't know yet." Max nodded, his eyes suddenly lighting up as if he had realized something. Syndicate doesn't just want to destroy the station. They want to create chaos, making it easier for them to take control. Mel looked at Max, an uneasy feeling creeping up inside her. "But why this station? Why not somewhere else?" "Because this is the center of the most important trade routes in the universe," Max replied, his voice resolute. "If they take it, they'll have control over a massive portion of the resources in this universe." The situation grew even more tense as they realized something. This space station wasn't just a strategic target. It had a hidden element that Syndicate was after. Both of them had to face a far more brutal conspiracy than they'd imagined. "We need to stop them before it's too late," Mel said, her eyes burning with determination. "We have to get to the control center." Max looked at her, and there was a moment of silence between them. "If we go in there, there will be a lot of obstacles. They know they're being hunted." "It's fine. I'm used to that," Mel chuckled dryly, continuing, "And so are you." Max gave a small smile, although still tense. "All right, let's go. We can't let Syndicate succeed." They continued running. But just then, an emergency broadcast echoed across the station. "Attention, all personnel and residents on Sirus space station. A biological weapon is being deployed. Immediate evacuation is required. Everyone move to the southern part of the station. Evacuate immediately." Mel stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes lighting up as she heard the news. "Biological weapon," she murmured. "That's why they attacked the station." Max tilted his head, his face growing even more serious. "A biological weapon that could wipe out humans? I suspect that's what Syndicate has been developing. So what do we do?" Mel asked, her voice no longer uncertain, now sharp with purpose. Max sighed. "We need to find where they're dispersing that weapon and stop it immediately. If not, Syndicate won't just destroy the station, they'll wipe out humanity." The two started running toward the control center, their steps growing more urgent. They were now facing not only Syndicate, but a plan that could destroy the entire Sirus space station. When they reached the door to the control center, Mel looked at Max and said, "We have to fight. We can't just stand by." Max nodded, his gaze hardening. "Together," he said, and then they charged into action. Gunfire echoed ahead, and they were thrust into an unavoidable battle. Max and Mel coordinated perfectly, every strike and every movement in sync. Max protected Mel as she approached the control panels while she fought to hold their ground. "Hurry!" Max shouted as a group of Syndicate soldiers charged toward them. Mel weaved past them at lightning speed, attacking quickly and precisely, leaving the enemy unable to react. But just as she was about to reach the control panel, a massive explosion sounded from behind, forcing both of them to turn. A missile had exploded, pushing them back. "We need to stop it before it's too late," Mel said, her eyes burning as she looked at the display screen. "Now or never." Max looked at her, then with unshakable resolve, he rushed forward, using his strength to push back the enemy, buying Mel the time she needed to complete the task. While the battle raged fiercely around them, they knew that this fight wasn't just about stopping a normal attack. It was a battle to save the entire universe. "We'll make it," Max said, with a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, full of determination. The two ran into a small, enclosed compartment where the space was tight and heavy doors slammed shut behind them. The chaotic sounds of the battle outside gradually faded, but the sounds of stray bullets, hurried footsteps, and faint groans echoed from the hallways. Mel stood next to Max, both of them drenched in sweat and full of tension after a series of fierce fights. The space in the compartment was too cramped, and they had to stand close together, unable to move or breathe comfortably. Mel could feel the closeness, Max's breath brushing her face, and she couldn't help but notice. She took a sharp breath, a little flustered, then suddenly turned to him. "Hey, Do you know I'm not used to being so close to other people? Mel said, her voice teasing but with a hint of tension. She carefully looked down to avoid meeting Max's sharp eyes. This feeling of intimacy truly made her uneasy. It wasn't a typical situation for her. In past missions, she was always the one in control, always keeping her distance from others. Max didn't seem flustered at all. He only smiled knowingly, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Oh, I get it," he said, his voice casual. "I'm not trying to be your companion, but don't worry. I just want to save your life." He paused as if thinking, then continued. "Although, if I'm saving someone's life in this situation, I'm sure that person owes me a drink after they survive." Mel couldn't help but laugh, a small smile but filled with enjoyment. "Oh, really? You think I'll thank you?" She raised an eyebrow, pretending to think. "If I survive, I'll buy you a drink, but not too expensive. And if I die, well, you won't get anything." Max shrugged, his face becoming more serious, though still with a hint of a smile. "If you die, then I won't have any chance of getting that drink. All right, don't worry. I'll do my best to make sure you survive." He smiled, but this time his smile had a little warmth, closer, making Mel feel a softness between them. In the midst of the fierce battles and looming dangers, a brief, light-hearted moment was enough to dispel the tension. Sometimes, in life, just a simple joke is enough to ease the pressure and create a pleasant moment between two people who had previously been adversaries. "You're not a bad guy," Mel said, her voice softer now as she noticed the sincerity in Max's eyes. "Maybe I've misjudged you." Max raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. "Thanks. I guess that's a compliment, right?" He continued with a playful tone. "Don't be too surprised, but I can also be a good friend if you need one." Mel couldn't help but laugh again. The tension from their earlier confrontation seemed to melt away, replaced by a lighter atmosphere, despite being in a cramped, dirty compartment. "Well then, after saving my life, I guess you deserve a little reward," Mel said, her smile mischievous. "One day, if you survive, I'll treat you to dinner." Max responded with a confident grin, a hint of humor still in his voice. "I'll remember your offer, but just so you know, I only eat good food." Mel and Max continued down the darkened hallways of the Syndicate base, their eyes solely focused on the task at hand, stopping the organization's plot before it was too late. The Sirus space station was being slowly destroyed by the attack, and the alarms blared relentlessly, signaling that the end was near. The station was descending into chaos. As Mel and Max rushed through the corridors, they could hear the footsteps of enemies approaching. Mel's blood seemed to boil. She had been through dangerous situations before, but this time felt different. Each step was full of pressure, and each passing minute could decide the fate of thousands of innocent lives. Max paused for a moment in front of the base's entrance, gripping his gun tightly. He didn't look at Mel, instead glancing down at the station's internal map, his eyes showing clear signs of stress. "The base is just ahead," he said in a low voice. "But there's a big problem. If we destroy it, many innocent creatures will be caught in the crossfire." Mel didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the door ahead. She knew she had to make a decision, but part of her didn't want to think about the cost. If we do nothing, Syndicate will easily take control of this entire region. But if we act, then how many lives will be lost? Max turned to face her, his eyes lighting up in the darkness. "The question isn't whether we can act, it's whether we can live with this decision once it's all over. We can save part of them, but we can't save them all. The issue is, we have to stop this plot." Mel couldn't deny it. She took a deep breath and looked down at the data chip still firmly in her hand. "You know, I'm not just thinking about stopping the plot. I'm thinking about what happens if we don't act." She paused, her eyes glancing over at Max. A moment of silence passed between them. She had lived a life with few connections to those around her, focusing only on the mission. But now, standing with Max, facing a life-or-death decision like this, she began to realize that she was changing. The feeling of connection wasn't just between her and the mission anymore, but also with the people she was trying to protect. Max didn't say anything more. He simply looked into Mel's eyes, as if he understood what she was feeling. "We've come too far to stop now. It's time to act, no matter the cost." Mel felt a jolt in her chest. She thought of the innocent lives, the civilians on the station, but she also couldn't ignore the fact that the world wouldn't be safe if Syndicate achieved their goal. She looked at Max and realized that they had already been through too much to stop now. "All right," she said, her voice more decisive than ever. "We'll stop them, no matter what the cost." Max nodded. He stepped forward and opened the door to the base, stepping into the darkness with unwavering confidence. The base door slowly creaked open, and blinding red light from emergency lights flooded the dark space inside. The smell of smoke and burning metal lingered in the air. Mel and Max stepped in, their eyes immediately drawn to the chaotic scene before them. Large crates of ammunition, destroyed control panels, and a Syndicate army lined up, ready for battle. But in front of them stood one person, cold eyes like steel, Vex, Mel's old enemy, a figure from her complicated past. Vex was no longer an ally but a traitor, now leading the Syndicate. As Mel and Max entered, Vex turned around, his eyes like dark pits. "You two are quite resilient," he sneered. "But this is where it all ends. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time." Max didn't need to say a word. He charged toward Vex with surprising speed, his gun tightly gripped in his hand. But in that instant, Vex drew an energy sword. With a swift swing, the blade easily deflected Max's bullet, forcing him to dodge. "Watch out!" Mel shouted as Max was pushed back by the force of Vex's strike. But without hesitation, she leaped into the fray, using her species' superior strength. Her body became agile and swift, each leap making her seem like a shadow slipping through Vex's attacks. She used her extraordinary speed to dodge Vex's sword swings, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Max didn't stop attacking either. He leaped into the air, using his suit's power to land a heavy punch on Vex's chest, sending him staggering backward. But Vex wasn't so easily defeated. He quickly regained his footing, his eyes filled with fury. "You won't win," Vex hissed, then activated his sword's combat mode. Each swing was now faster and more powerful, causing the space around them to shatter with every strike. The battle grew increasingly intense, and Max and Mel knew that if they didn't end it soon, the entire station would fall to the Syndicate. Vex's powerful blows pushed them to their limits, and they started to take damage, but they didn't have time to rest. Determined not to lose, Mel finally found her opening. She jumped high, soaring over Vex's head like a gust of wind, and then spun around to attack him from behind. A powerful kick to his back nearly sent him to the ground. But in that moment, Max had created an opening, using his superior combat skills to block the next incoming attack. He used his strength and resilience to land powerful punches on Vex, causing him to stagger. They moved in perfect coordination, like a well-oiled fighting machine. Mel quickly closed in, using her species' strength to land precise attacks, while Max defended her and fought Vex. Every punch, every strike, every kick, everything converged into a single decisive moment. Vex snarled in rage as he felt the force of Mel and Max's combined efforts. He tried to retreat to prepare for a final attack, but at that moment, Max closed in, landing a heavy punch to his face, knocking him to the ground. Vex tried to stand but couldn't. Meanwhile, Mel quickly approached and locked his arms in a powerful grip. "You've lost, Vex," Mel said, her voice cold, but not without a touch of compassion. "This is the price for your betrayal." Vex sneered, but the defeat was clear in his eyes. "You may win this battle, but the war is far from over." After successfully thwarting Syndicate's plot, the atmosphere around Sirus space station began to calm. The emergency lights slowly dimmed, replaced by waves of calm, as if everything had been set in motion. The security team had reclaimed Syndicate's base, and the station, though bearing scars from the battle, was slowly recovering from the devastation. Mel stood at the window, gazing out at the vast expanse. She could see the stars sparkling in the distance, a promise of peace, of a future filled with uncertainty, but also opportunity. Everything was still fresh, but she knew what she had gone through wasn't just about victories and defeats. It was a long journey to realize that love, the connections between people, is the truly important thing in life. Max stood beside her, also looking out into space. Silently, they didn't need to say more. They both knew they had overcome the greatest challenge of their lives. What they had fought for wasn't just to protect themselves, but to protect the innocent lives of people living in a world full of dangers and threats from criminal organizations. You think we did the right thing? Mel spoke up, but it wasn't a question. It was a confirmation, as if searching for reassurance in what they had done. Max looked at her, his eyes bright in the dim light of the station. Definitely. We did what needed to be done. But maybe the most important thing I learned on this journey is that sometimes not everything we do is for the mission. It's for the people we care about. Mel smiled faintly, a smile that couldn't hide the relief and happiness she felt. She had once thought she could live alone, that strength and independence were the only things she needed. But now, standing next to Max, she realized that love, connection, and sacrifice for those you trust are the most important things in life. You know, Mel began, looking at Max with a gentle gaze, I was wrong to think I could run forever. In the end, I realized that real connections are what truly matter. Max looked at her with a warm smile, then turned back to the vastness of space outside the window. With each other, we can face anything. Mel nodded, then placed her hand on Max's shoulder, a commitment, a promise that they would face whatever challenges lay ahead together. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, they were no longer alone. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. The story ended in silence as they stood together, gazing at the vast universe. The space still vast and full of mysteries, but now they were no longer afraid. They knew that no matter what the future held, as long as they had each other, they could overcome it all. Mel and Max's story wasn't the end. It was a new beginning, where love, sacrifice, and the connections between people would be the driving force to continue walking the challenging road ahead.